Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to our third and final screencast on Chapter 1. So in our first screencast, we really took a look at European culture and the major things that drove the Europeans to go out and explore the New World and the things that defined their culture. Second screencast, we took a look at the major things that define the Native Americans and their culture. Today, really what we're going to do is kind of take a look at this major clash of cultures that takes place between the Europeans and the Native Americans. So the first thing that kind of like pops into my mind is, why is there such a clash of cultures in North America? Because if you look at the history of colonization, you always have to put American history into the context of the larger world history. If you take a look at it, at this point, by 1607 with Jamestown and 1620 with the Pilgrims coming to Massachusetts, it's been about 120 or so, 130 years since the first Europeans came to the New World. Columbus comes in 1492. Then you have Cortez coming, and you have Pizarro and the other conquistadors. Uh, the Portuguese, Henry Hudson coming to New York. So there's been many Europeans who come to the New World. So this is not the first time that the Old World and the New World have met. It's just the first time that they've met, say, with the English in North America. And so the first thing that you want to kind of understand is, well, why is this such a major clash of cultures? How come the Native Americans don't have some knowledge of who the Europeans are? And really the big reason for why that is because there's not a huge north-south trade that's happening in between South America and North America, between the Native American tribes. There's no North American and South American equivalent of the Silk Road, say like between Asia and Europe. If this had happened reversed, and the Native Americans were coming to Europe, the Europeans probably would have had a pretty good idea of who these people were before they got there. Why? Because of the extensive trading that was going on between Asia, the Middle East, and Europe. They were much more linked in, these different continents. North and South America, there's really no equivalent of that's taking place. So that's the first thing you want to kind of understand. So what we're going to kind of jump into here is some of the big differences that, or misunderstandings that take place between the natives and the Europeans. So the first area that we're going to focus on here is going to be this idea of land ownership. So we kind of come from the European tradition because that's kind of who founded our country with a lot of their ideas and their ideology. So the idea of owning land is not foreign to us. And for the Europeans, they believe in kind of this concept of individual land ownership. And it's not just the Europeans, it's basically the entire old world. So Asian society, Middle Eastern society, European society, North African society, they all come from this concept of owning land. And owning land was equated with power and prestige and being an important person in society. So when the colonists come to the New World, they bring this idea of wanting to buy and purchase and own land to the New World. And so what you're looking at here is kind of an overhead shot of like flying over in a plane of, say, a part of America, and you can really see the individually defined pieces of land that are there. And so this is kind of an understanding of that you can own a piece of land, and that's a very European, very old world idea as far as owning land and attaching land ownership with status. Now, if you look at the Native Americans, what you're looking at here is a recreation of Manhattan. So what they used to call, the term they used for Manhattan before the Europeans get here is called Mannahatta. And if you look at it, obviously it looks very different than it does now, but you can get a good idea of what the Native Americans thought of as owning the land. They really don't have a concept of land ownership the way that the Europeans do. They look at owning land the same way that we would look at like owning the air or owning the water. They kind of look at it as like you can't own that. It's something that's communally used by the people and communally owned by the people, but it can't be yours individually. No person can own a piece of land. And that's pretty much the way a lot of Native Americans kind of viewed the land and viewed owning the land. And so this can kind of cause a lot of problems. So the reason I put Manhattan up here, the classic example is everybody kind of gets told that story in third grade that, the Europeans bought Manhattan Island for $24. That exchange is true, but the Native Americans didn't quite view it the same way that the Dutch viewed it. They didn't view it in the same light. They kind of viewed it as, oh, we're allowing these people to use the land, but we're also going to use it too. And so the Europeans viewed it in a very different way. And so you really can't blame either one for that misunderstanding. It's just that they had such very different ideas of what it meant that they just couldn't see, eye to eye on that. So that's the first big area where you're going to have some misunderstandings. Second big one is going to be as far as gender roles. So both societies really do have a very defined concept of gender roles, what men do and what women do. So unlike maybe our society today, which the gender lines are kind of very vague and very skewed, in the modern society, they don't have it. They have very defined gender roles, but very different gender roles at the same time. So first, let's take a look at the Europeans. So if you take a look at the Europeans, what you're looking at here is a famous painting by a Dutch painter named Bruegel, and it's called The Harvesters. So what you should take a look at here is, first the fact that they're harvesting the land. Second thing, though, is that the people who are doing all of the work, all of the farming work, are men. So in the lower classes of European society, men did the farming work. That was considered a man's job. In the upper class, men primarily were soldiers or just basically owned land in general. So farming was equated with being a male profession. What did women do in these lower classes? Well, they took care of the house, they raised the children, but they did not do farm work. Now, as far as the Native Americans are concerned, it's pretty much the complete opposite. I believe this photograph is in your textbook. The majority of the people here are supposed to be women, and primarily in most Native American societies, women did the farming. So it was not a male profession and not a male job at all. So very different from the Europeans. What did the men do in these Native American societies? Well, primarily, the men did hunting. So they went out and they hunted, kind of like the traditional societies that you learned about earlier, say in 9th grade, where men went out and they did the hunting. Now, in European society, this is going to kind of lead to a lot of, again, misunderstandings between the two different cultures. So how do you think the Europeans view the Native Americans when they're doing this? Well, their viewpoint of this is first and foremost, one, that, they're lazy. Why would they get that idea? Well, you have to think about the tradition that the Europeans are coming from. Who hunts in European society? Well, the people that hunt in European society are all upper class, wealthy people, nobility hunts. Regular people do not hunt. Hunting is not done for subsistence in these traditional European societies. Hunting is only done for a sport, for fun. So it's kind of looked at as like a game. The regular people don't have those rights. So they kind of look at the men as being lazy here, and they're making the women do all of the real work, that they're making them do the farming work. And so it's just not really an understanding of each other's cultures. How do the Native Americans view the Europeans? They also can't understand their concept of having these big farms and kind of breaking up the labor the way that they do, and they think that they give their women no work at all, that they're not doing any of the, not really even helping out and doing any of the real work to help the family. So you have, again, misunderstanding of each other's culture. Alright, next big thing here is going to be religious beliefs. So we spent a lot of time in the first screencast talking about the European religious beliefs. So we know that they come from a Christian background, which is monotheistic, and they're very much tied into the teachings of the Bible. So the word of the Bible is the word of God, according to the Europeans. And so what it says in that book goes. And so they're very tied into that. And so one of the aspects of the Bible is that they look at it, kind of comes back to the way that they view the land. they view kind of the Earth's creatures and these things as put there for man's use. And the Native Americans really look at it in a very different way. So a lot of the Native American societies are what you would consider polytheistic. Some of them not, because there's a lot of different Native American tribes. But a lot of them would be considered polytheistic, or we would call them animistic, using the ideology of animism. And so their religion is very different. It's not really tied into a written text at all. It's very spiritual, nature-based. It has a lot of similarities, I believe, with Japanese Shintoism that you guys also studied in ninth grade. And they kind of have a very different view of man. So man is not above the other creatures on the planet. Man is just kind of like fitting into nature, just one part of it. And so they have to have this ultimate respect for, for the animals and the nature around them. And the Europeans don't really have that concept either. So this creates problems also as far as hunting, overhunting, using the land, abusing the land. And so I'm going to ask you guys to kind of fill out that column. What problems do you think that this religious differences are going to cause? All right. Next big topic that we're going to take a look at are settlement patterns. So again, a lot of this stuff goes back to land and using the land. So I want to take a... Hey guys, sorry about that. I got cut off a little bit there, so this second screencast will be very short. So where we kind of left off were settlement patterns, kind of the differences between European and Native American settlement patterns. So again, Manhattan kind of gives you a good context as to how the Native Americans viewed using the land versus how a European would view using the land. So when the Europeans took a look at a place like Manhattan and the way that it was when the Dutch first arrived, they would kind of say, well, the natives are wasting the land. Look at all those natural resources, and they're not even using it. They're not even farming it. They're not even, getting the most potential out of the land. That's not how the Native Americans would look at it. Because again, it goes back to their idea of how to use the land and their religious beliefs. They're going to kind of fit into it and say, well, we are using the land. What the Native Americans would basically do is, a lot of them, is they would kind of have semi-permanent settlements in different places. They would have areas where they would do farming. They would leave most of the land as far as, the forest, kind of in the native way that it was. And they would have different areas where they would do farming and different village sites throughout their territory. And they would move at different times of the year and live in different places. So it's kind of an idea. It's not quite nomadic. It's definitely not a nomadic lifestyle. It's kind of like in between the European farming style of permanent settlement, completely permanent settlements, and nomadic. And so they kind of have like these semi-permanent living arrangements. And so the Europeans kind of take a look at this, and they kind of feel like, well, the natives are completely wasting it, and they're not using the land to its full potential. And the only way to kind of use it to its full potential is to set up farming and to really extract the resources from the land. Natives will kind of look at the European style and say, well, they're destroying the land, they're killing it, they're taking too much. They're taking more than one person can use. What's the whole point of that? And a lot of the Europeans, what they're doing here is driven by economics. Say the Dutch, for example, they want these beaver skins because it's very prized back in Europe, and so they'll hunt them to exhaustion, when the natives would never really take that approach to it. All right, the last area that we're going to take a look at is technology and military. And so again, very different styles as far as military is concerned and the level of technology that they have. So we all kind of know that the Europeans are coming in with firearms and cannons and guns basically, and the natives are still kind of using bow and arrow and kind of what we would consider more primitive forms of weaponry. But there's also a difference as far as military style is concerned. The Europeans are very used to kind of larger scale warfare, and a little bit more used to kind of conquering territory and fighting in that sense, because it's happened many times in Euro-Asian history. with these different empires that sweep across and conquer these vast territories. The Native Americans, they do have those types of empires, but on a smaller scale. Say, for example, the Iroquois up in upstate New York are a very warlike Native American group of people, and they do conquer basically all of upstate New York and Canada. So they do fight these wars, but for the most part, they're a little bit more on a smaller scale and more of a tribal level than the Europeans are more used to fighting as far as these bigger warfare, these bigger style wars. Um, so that's really going to kind of sum up this major clash of cultures that's going to take place between the Europeans and the natives, and it really is just two totally different lifestyles, and that's why they have so many misunderstandings, conflict, and just problems associated between the native way of life and the European way of life, not just the colonial period, but all the way through American history. It's just not really, they really can't, they have a really hard time meshing together. Alright guys, so like I said in the beginning, this is the last screencast of Chapter 1. We have about a week left until school starts, so I hope you enjoy your last week, and I look forward to seeing you guys on Monday.